A millionaire noticed a little girl sitting alone in an orphanage. The next day, the girl came up to him and said, "You are my family." The soft hum of the coffee machine filled the kitchen, a hollow sound in the cavernous silence of Adam's home. He stood by the counter, fingers wrapped around a mug he barely remembered pouring. The bitter aroma drifted upward, but his mind was elsewhere, stuck in a loop of memories he couldn't escape. Anna's laugh, so bright, so full of life, echoed in his head, a cruel ghost haunting the quiet corners of his day. He glanced toward the living room where Marilyn sat, a still silhouette on the edge of the couch. She was wrapped in the same blanket she had pulled around herself every morning for the last year, staring blankly at the untouched plate of toast on the coffee table. The distant light of the television flickered over her pale features, but her expression never shifted. Adam couldn't remember the last time she looked at him without her eyes clouded by sorrow. He set his mug down and crossed the room. "You should eat something," he said softly, careful not to disturb the fragile air between them. Marilyn didn't respond. Her hands moved to adjust the blanket slightly, her gaze glued to the muted news broadcast. Her silence had grown so familiar, it no longer surprised him. He wanted to reach for her, to tell her he missed her, that they could try to piece themselves back together. But even standing this close, she felt 1,000 miles away. Instead, Adam turned to the bookshelf in the corner, running his fingers along the spines of books he hadn't opened in years. Among them sat a photo frame, slightly tilted, the glass smudged with time. He picked it up. In the picture, Anna sat between him and Marilyn, her arms stretched wide to pull them closer for the shot. Marilyn's smile in the image felt like a stranger's, radiant, alive. Adam stared at his own face, frozen, in a moment he barely recognized anymore. The sound of a commercial jolted him from his reverie. Marilyn shifted slightly, her eyes flicking toward him for the briefest moment before returning to the screen. It wasn't anger or blame in her gaze, just exhaustion, an endless well of grief that mirrored his own. Adam expressed his interest in visiting St. Clair's this week. The donations would be greatly appreciated. Marilyn's blanket rustled, her shoulders lifting in a shrug that felt like dismissal. "Do what you want," she murmured, her voice flat, almost inaudible. Adam set the frame back on the shelf and lingered there, wishing he could say something to bridge the chasm between them. But words felt pointless when the weight of loss sat like a stone on both their hearts. Instead, he grabbed his coat from the rack and headed for the door. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. Adam pulled his scarf tighter around his neck and started walking, the rhythmic crunch of his boots against the pavement filling the void left by unspoken words. The streets of Austin were waking up slowly, the hum of traffic growing in the distance. Adam's footsteps led him instinctively toward familiar places, corners of the city that held echoes of better days. He found himself near the coffee shop where he and Andrew used to meet on rare occasions when their lives briefly overlapped. It was closed now, the windows papered over with signs of renovation. Adam stood there for a moment, remembering his brother's voice, always firm, with an edge of defiance that had driven their father mad. Andrew's departure from the family felt like the first rift in their foundation. Adam had tried to stay neutral back then, stuck between Bradley's relentless disapproval of Charlotte and Andrew's stubborn refusal to bow to it. He hadn't heard from his brother in years now, though sometimes he caught himself scanning crowds, imagining Andrew's face older, weathered, but still carrying that same spark. He exhaled, his breath curling in the cold air, and turned toward St. Clair's. The orphanage loomed at the edge of the neighborhood, its aging brick walls softened by ivy. It had been years since Adam had walked through those doors. The place had always been a refuge for him, a reminder of simpler times when helping others could momentarily dull the ache of his own struggles. Maybe, he thought, it could be that again. As he approached, a faint sound reached his ears, children's laughter, shrill and unguarded, spilling over the iron gate. For the first time in months, something stirred in him, a fragile ember of warmth beneath the layers of numbness. Adam placed his hand on the gate, hesitating briefly before pushing it open. Inside, the yard was alive with motion. A group of children chased each other around a battered slide, their faces lit with joy. He stood there for a moment, watching them, feeling the faintest flicker of something he couldn't yet name. Then he stepped forward, hoping, though he wouldn't say it aloud, that this visit might begin to fill the hollow space inside him. The sound of children's laughter carried faintly on the breeze as Adam stepped through the wrought iron gates of St. Clair's orphanage. The yard stretched wide before him, punctuated by an aging slide and a rusted jungle gym. A cluster of children darted around, their shrill voices echoing off the brick walls. Adam stood there for a moment, absorbing the scene, his hands tucked deep in the pockets of his overcoat. It had been years since he'd visited, but the sight felt oddly familiar, like an old photograph brought to life. "Mr. Hamilton." A warm, lilting voice drew his attention. He turned to see a woman approaching, her brisk stride softened by the effortless smile on her face. "It's been a while. Welcome back." "Sister Louise." Adam nodded, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "Good to see you again." She gestured toward the children with a small laugh. "They've been looking forward to visitors. A fresh face does wonders for their spirits." Adam's gaze swept over the yard, lingering briefly on the children. A boy was impressively scaling the jungle gym, while a pair of girls engaged in a game of hopscotch on a patch of worn concrete. Amid the activity, a solitary figure caught his eye, a small girl sitting on a bench near the far corner of the yard. She had her knees drawn up to her chest, her chin resting lightly on them. Her hair, a soft brown, caught the sunlight in streaks of gold. "Who's that?" Adam asked, nodding subtly toward her. Sister Louise followed his gaze. "Oh, that's Sarah. Well, she keeps to herself mostly. Shy girl." Adam found his feet moving before he'd consciously decided to approach. He stopped a few paces away, lowering himself slightly so his height wouldn't seem intimidating. "Hi there," he said gently. The girl's eyes flicked toward him, wide and wary. They were a deep, almost haunting green, and for a moment, Adam's breath caught. Something about those eyes stirred a memory he couldn't quite place. She said nothing, only tightening her grip around her knees. "I'm Adam," he continued, keeping his voice even. "You looked like you might want some company." Sarah studied him, her expression unreadable. Slowly she shook her head. "I'm fine," she murmured, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Adam didn't push. He lowered himself to sit on the edge of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. "It's a lovely spot you've got here," he said, nodding toward the small garden behind the bench. "Peaceful." She said nothing, but her gaze followed his, landing on the neat rows of flowers someone had carefully planted. Adam let the silence stretch, sensing that any sudden move might send her retreating further into herself. Sister Louise appeared again, her arms crossed lightly as she observed them from a few feet away. "Sarah's been with us for a while now," she said, her voice gentle but clear enough for both of them to hear. "Came to us when she was just 2 years old. Lost her parents in a car accident." Adam turned toward Louise, but not before catching a flicker of emotion in Sarah's expression, a flash of something too brief to name. "That must have been difficult," he said, more to himself than anyone. "It was," Louise confirmed. "She doesn't talk about it much, or anything really, but she's strong in her own way." Adam glanced back at Sarah. She had turned her face slightly, her gaze fixed on the ground now, her small fingers absently picking at the hem of her sweater. The way she held herself, guarded but not entirely closed off, reminded him of someone. The resemblance tugged at him, insistently but elusively. "I used to have a brother," Adam said softly, his words directed more at the air than the girl beside him. He had a way of sitting like that, head tilted just so, like he was thinking about something he couldn't quite figure out. Sarah didn't respond, but her hands stilled, her fingers curling inward. Adam noticed, but said nothing. He simply stayed there, his presence quiet and unobtrusive. After a while, Louise stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on Adam's shoulder. "Would you like to see the donation room? We've got some supplies to sort." Adam hesitated, his gaze lingering on Sarah for a moment longer. Then he stood, brushing the dirt from his coat. "Of course," he said. As they walked away, he turned once more, catching a glimpse of Sarah, watching them from beneath her lashes. It wasn't much, a faint flicker of interest, quickly hidden, but it was enough to plant a seed of determination in Adam's heart. He didn't know why, but he needed to know more about this girl. The orphanage's small office smelled faintly of aged paper and furniture polish. Adam sat in a creaky chair, a ledger book spread open on the desk before him. His fingers traced the neat rows of names and figures, each line representing a donation or contribution. It was meticulous work, the kind of record-keeping that spoke to Sister Louise's dedication. "Your father's name is here quite a bit," Sister Louise said, standing by the filing cabinet. She handed Adam another ledger. "He's been a consistent supporter over the years." Adam frowned slightly, his eyes scanning the pages. Bradley Hamilton. The name appeared repeatedly, his donations listed in sums that were generous but understated, almost as if he didn't want to draw attention. Adam tapped the edge of the book thoughtfully. "I didn't realize he was so involved," Sister Louise nodded. "He doesn't come in often, but when he does, he always asks about the children. He's especially thoughtful when it comes to the quieter ones." Adam glanced toward the closed cabinet nearby. "Speaking of the children, would it be possible for me to see Sarah's file? Just out of curiosity." Sister Louise hesitated, her smile fading into something more reserved. "I can't share much, but I'll see what I can find." She moved to the cabinet, her keys jingling softly in the quiet room. Adam sat stiffly in a chair by the desk, his gaze drifting toward the walls, adorned with faded photographs of smiling children. His thoughts lingered on Sarah, the flicker of her guarded expression haunting him in a way he couldn't explain. "Here we are," Sister Louise said, pulling a thin manila folder from the drawer. She placed it gently on the desk and slid it toward Adam. "This is Sarah's record. There's not much, I'm afraid. Her case was unusual." Adam leaned forward, his hands resting lightly on the folder. He hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge, as if opening it would unlock something he wasn't ready to face. "Unusual? How?" he asked, his voice measured. Sister Louise folded her hands in front of her. Her parents passed away in a car accident when she was 2. By the time she was brought to us, there wasn't much information left. Just the basics. Names, a vague description of the accident, and nothing about extended family. It was as though she had been erased. Adam frowned, flipping open the folder. The first page was a scanned form, old and slightly blurred, but the names were clear enough: Andrew Hamilton and Charlotte Reed. His breath hitched, and for a moment he felt the room tilt. Andrew. The name stared back at him, cold and unrelenting. Adam blinked, his hand tightening around the edge of the folder as his mind raced. He forced himself to read further, his eyes scanning the sparse details. Date of birth, the approximate location of the accident, and a single photograph of a younger Sarah, her wide eyes staring blankly at the camera. "Are you all right?" Sister Louise's voice broke through the haze. Adam straightened, though his mind was a swirl of disbelief. "Yes," he said, though the word felt hollow. "Just trying to take it all in." He closed the folder carefully, his movements slow and deliberate. "Can I take this with me? I'd like some time to review it." Louise hesitated before nodding. "Of course. But please, if there's anything you can tell me about her family or what this might mean for her future, it would help." Adam nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. "I'll let you know." He left the office in a daze, the folder tucked securely under his arm. Outside, the sunlight seemed too bright, the laughter of children too sharp against his spiraling thoughts. He made his way to his car, unlocking the door with a mechanical precision, and slid into the driver's seat. For a long moment, he simply sat there, staring blankly through the windshield. Andrew. The name conjured a rush of memories. His brother's effortless grin, the defiant tilt of his chin when he argued with their father, the distant sound of their laughter during simpler times. And then, the darker memories followed. The shouting matches, Bradley's sharp words laced with disapproval, Andrew's final, bitter departure. Adam had tried to reach out after that, with a handful of letters and calls that went unanswered, and then nothing. Years of silence until Andrew became a ghost of the past, a wound buried but never healed. And now, this. He exhaled shakily and started the car. He needed answers. There was only one way to be certain. The clinic was quiet when Adam arrived, the receptionist's soft smile doing little to ease the knot in his chest. The DNA test was straightforward, requiring only a simple swab, but every moment felt heavy with significance. The sterile walls and muted colors of the waiting room seemed to press in on him as he completed the paperwork. "Results will take a few days," the nurse informed him as she sealed the samples. "We'll notify you as soon as they're ready." Adam nodded, his thanks muted. He left the clinic feeling the weight of the unknown pressing harder against his thoughts. Back at home, the house felt emptier than usual. Marilyn was in the bedroom, the door closed, a quiet signal that she didn't want to talk. Adam sat at the kitchen table, the folder open before him. His hands trembled slightly as he reread the sparse details. The resemblance had been there, he realized now. The way Sarah tilted her head, her quiet presence that mirrored Andrew's introspective nature. But more than that, there had been something in her eyes, a spark of defiance mingled with vulnerability. It was Andrew's eyes, staring back at him through time. He leaned back, closing his eyes against the flood of emotions. If Sarah was Andrew's daughter, if she was truly his niece, then what? How had she ended up alone, erased from their family's narrative? And what would Bradley say when he found out? The thought of his father tightened something in Adam's chest. Bradley Hamilton wasn't a man who dealt easily with ambiguity. For him, there was order, precision, and a need to control every outcome. How would he react to the discovery of the granddaughter he'd never known? Adam opened his eyes and reached for his phone. The call to Bradley could wait. For now, he needed to prepare. For the results, for the conversation to come, and for the fragile connection he already felt forming with Sarah. The answers wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to find them. For Sarah, for Andrew, for the family they had all but lost. Adam returned to the orphanage 2 days later, the unease in his chest growing heavier with every step. The faint hum of children's chatter echoed across the yard, but his focus was elsewhere. He wasn't here for the ledgers or for quiet conversation with Sister Louise. He needed certainty, a truth he couldn't ignore any longer. Sarah was seated on the same bench as before, her legs dangling idly while she watched the other children play. She didn't look up as Adam approached, her small hands fiddling with the hem of her sweater. He stopped a few feet away and crouched slightly, hoping not to startle her. "Hi again, Sarah," he said gently, his voice carefully neutral. She glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "Hi." For a moment, Adam hesitated, unsure how to proceed. He wasn't here to interrogate her, and yet the urgency in his chest was almost unbearable. He gestured toward a nearby patch of flowers. "Those are beautiful. Did you plant them?" Sarah shook her head, her eyes flicking toward the garden. "Sister Louise did. I just water them sometimes." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a note of pride. Adam grabbed the chance. "It must take a gentle hand to care for them like that. I bet they grow better because of you." Her lips quirked upward in the faintest hint of a smile, but she quickly looked away. Adam let the silence stretch, then reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the small envelope he had brought. "Hey, Sarah," he said softly, "there's something in your hair. Do you mind if I help?" She frowned slightly, but nodded. Adam leaned closer, carefully plucking a strand of hair caught near her collar. He held it for a moment, his heart pounding as he slipped it into the envelope. Sarah didn't seem to notice, her gaze already drifting back to the other children. "Thanks," he said, stepping back. "I'll see you around, okay?" She nodded again, her attention already elsewhere, as Adam turned and walked away. His hands trembled as he tightened his grip on the envelope. The clinic felt colder this time, the sterile walls a sharp contrast to the warmth of the orphanage. Adam sat stiffly in the waiting room, the envelope resting heavily in his lap. The nurse called him in quickly, and within minutes, the test was underway. The sample was sealed, the paperwork completed, and the results promised within 48 hours. But those hours stretched like days, every minute a relentless reminder of the uncertainty that hung over him. He avoided Marilyn, her presence too much to bear while his thoughts spiraled. The folder sat open on the kitchen table again, the names Andrew Hamilton and Charlotte Reed glaring back at him like accusations. When the results finally arrived, Adam stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. His hands were steady, but his heart raced as he unfolded the paper inside. The words leapt off the page. Having blood relations. He sank into a chair, the weight of confirmation settling over him. Sarah was Andrew's daughter, his niece. The girl sitting alone on that bench wasn't just a quiet child with a tragic past. She was family, a living connection to a brother he had failed to protect, a family he had let slip through his fingers. Memories of Andrew surged forward, unbidden. His defiance against their father's expectations, the heated arguments that ended with Andrew walking out for good. Adam had tried to reach out afterward, but life had gotten in the way. Work, responsibilities. And then, one day, it was too late. Andrew was gone, and now all that remained was this fragile thread. Sarah. Adam leaned forward, pressing his hands to his face. Guilt gnawed at him, sharp and unforgiving. He had lost Andrew, but he wouldn't lose Sarah too. Not now. Not when there was still a chance to make things right. The next morning, Adam stood outside Bradley's study, his hand hovering over the door. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. Bradley deserved to know the truth. But this wasn't just about his father. It was about Sarah, about Andrew, about a family that had already endured too much loss. He knocked, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. Inside, Bradley's voice called out, low and clipped. "Come in." Adam pushed the door open, stepping into the room that always felt more like a fortress than a sanctuary. Bradley looked up from his desk, his eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Adam. "What is it?" Bradley asked, his tone brisk. Adam stepped forward, holding the folder tightly in his hand. "We need to talk. It's about Sarah." For the first time in years, Bradley's expression flickered, not with anger or impatience, but with something almost imperceptible. Recognition. Adam closed the door behind him, preparing for a conversation that would change everything. Bradley leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly in the otherwise silent room. His hands rested on the armrests, fingers steepled as he regarded Adam with the cool, analytical gaze that had defined his presence for decades. "Sarah," he repeated, his tone even. "What about her?" Adam placed the folder on Bradley's desk with more force than he intended, the papers inside shifting slightly. "She's Andrew's daughter," Adam said, his voice tight. "I had a DNA test done. It's confirmed." For a moment, Bradley didn't move. His expression remained neutral, unreadable, though his eyes narrowed slightly as they flicked to the folder. "Andrew's daughter," he said finally, as though tasting the words. "And you're certain?" Adam's frustration simmered beneath the surface, barely contained. "I just said I had a DNA test done," he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "What part of confirmed isn't clear?" Bradley's gaze didn't waver, but there was a brief pause before he spoke again. "I see." That was it. No shock, no outrage, no questions. Just two words delivered with maddening composure. Adam's fists clenched at his sides. "Is that all you have to say?" he demanded. "Your son, your own flesh and blood, had a daughter, and you act like it's just another line item on a ledger." Bradley finally shifted, leaning forward slightly, as his eyes met Adam's. "What exactly do you expect me to say, Adam?" he asked, his tone sharp but calm. "This is a development, yes, but what do you want from me?" Adam's anger spilled over. "What do I want?" he snapped. "I want you to acknowledge what you did to Andrew, the way you pushed him out, the way you couldn't accept his choices, his life, his love. Do you think he left because he wanted to? You drove him away, and now he's gone." Bradley's jaw tightened, the first crack in his stoic exterior. "Andrew made his choices," he said evenly. "He knew what was expected of him, and he chose to ignore it." Adam slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing through the study. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice low but seething. "Don't you dare blame him for your arrogance. You couldn't stand that he loved someone you didn't approve of. You couldn't let him live his life without controlling every detail." The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with years of unspoken grievances. Bradley's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt as Adam continued. "And now," Adam said, his voice trembling, "he's dead. He died in that car crash with Charlotte 6 years ago. Did you know that? Did you know your son is gone? And the only thing left of him is that little girl sitting alone on a bench at the orphanage." For a fleeting moment, something flickered in Bradley's eyes. Pain, regret, maybe even guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of control. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I didn't know." Adam stared at him, the admission landing like a blow. For all his frustration, he had expected more. Some acknowledgement, some crack in the unshakable facade Bradley wore, but all he got was a cold, simple denial. "She's family," Adam said, his voice softening slightly, but still firm. "Andrew's gone, but Sarah is here. She's part of us, whether you like it or not. And I'm not going to let her grow up thinking she's alone in this world." Bradley's gaze lingered on the folder, his expression inscrutable. "And what do you propose we do about this?" he asked finally. "We?" Adam let out a bitter laugh. "This isn't about you. This is about doing what's right for Sarah, for Andrew. I thought you deserved to know, but don't think for a second that I need your permission to act. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she has the family she deserves." Bradley's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't respond. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, until Adam finally turned toward the door. He paused, one hand on the handle, and glanced back. "Andrew deserved better," he said quietly. "Sarah deserves better. I just hope you realize that, before it's too late." With that, he left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Bradley sat motionless for a long time, his eyes fixed on the folder Adam had left on the desk. For the first time in years, the great Bradley Hamilton felt something he couldn't suppress, an ache he didn't yet have a name for. Leave a comment salad if you enjoy this family story genre. We'd love to hear it. Then we'll continue today's story. Adam was midway through a report when the sound of firm footsteps echoed through the marble-floored corridor of his office. He glanced up just as the door swung open, and there stood Bradley Hamilton, his imposing frame filling the doorway. The old man looked out of place in the sleek, modern surroundings, his tailored suit sharp, but his face weighed down by something uncharacteristically human. "Adam," Bradley said, his voice low but steady. "We need to talk." The tension between them still simmered from their last encounter, and Adam's irritation flared at his father's sudden appearance. "This isn't a favorable time," Adam said, stacking his papers deliberately. "Whatever it is, it can wait." "No," Bradley replied, stepping inside and shutting the door firmly behind him. "It can't." There was something in his tone, a rawness Adam had never heard before. It gave him pause. Reluctantly, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "All right, then," he said tersely. "Talk, please." Bradley walked to the window, his gaze fixed on the skyline. For a moment, he seemed lost in thought, his shoulders heavier than usual. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "You were right," he said, "about Andrew, about Sarah." Adam's stomach tightened. He didn't interrupt, his eyes fixed on his father as the old man turned to face him. "I knew about Sarah," Bradley admitted, his words measured, but trembling slightly at the edges. "I've known for years." Adam's mouth opened, but no words came. He stared, his mind racing to keep up with what he was hearing. Bradley took a breath, his composure faltering for the first time. "After the accident," he continued, "there was chaos. Andrew and Charlotte were gone, and Sarah almost disappeared too. She was taken to the hospital, but there was a nurse, Beverly. She wasn't just a nurse. She was part of a ring." Adam frowned, his confusion giving way to dread. "What are you talking about?" Bradley's voice grew harder, his fists clenching at his sides. "A human trafficking ring. Beverly saw an opportunity, and she was going to sell Sarah. A 2-year-old child, my granddaughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Adam felt his chest tighten, his anger bubbling beneath the surface. "And you stopped it?" "Yes," Bradley said, his gaze meeting Adam's directly for the first time. "I had connections. I used every one of them to find her before she disappeared forever. I found Beverly. I found Sarah. And I made sure Beverly never touched another child again." Adam's breath was shallow, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Why didn't you—" "Because it wasn't safe," Bradley interrupted, his voice rising. "Sarah was a target. If anyone knew who she was, what she was worth, they would have come for her again. I couldn't take that risk, not with her life. Adam shook his head, struggling to process the revelation. So, you put her in an orphanage, he demanded. You left her there, alone. Bradley's face twisted, a rare crack in his armor. It wasn't supposed to be forever, he said. It was the only way to keep her hidden, to keep her safe. I made sure she was cared for. I visited. I donated. I tried to protect her, the best way I knew how. You tried, Adam echoed bitterly, standing now. You tried. But you didn't trust anyone else, not even me. Do you have any idea what she's been through? What would Andrew, your son, have thought of this? Bradley's jaw tightened, but his eyes glistened with something unfamiliar. Don't you think I've thought about that every day? He said, his voice breaking slightly. Every day, I ask myself if I could have done more, if I made the right choice. And every day, I come back to the same answer. I kept her alive. Adam paced the room, his emotions warring between fury and reluctant understanding. You should have told me, he said finally, his voice quieter but no less firm. I could have helped. Bradley's shoulders sagged, his age showing more than ever. Maybe, he said, but I couldn't risk it, and I won't apologize for keeping her safe. The room fell silent, the weight of Bradley's confession pressing down on both of them. Adam stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on his father. She's not safe in an orphanage forever, he said. She needs a family. She needs us. Bradley nodded slowly, his eyes shadowed but resolute. I know, he said. That's why I'm here, to tell you the truth, to make sure you bring her home. For the first time in years, Adam saw his father not as the unyielding patriarch, but as a man burdened by his own failures and regrets. It didn't erase the pain, the anger, but it was enough. For now. I will, Adam said, his voice steady. For Andrew, for Sarah. Bradley closed his eyes briefly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Good, he said. It's time. This time Adam believed him. The air in Adam's office felt heavier after Bradley's confession. The quiet hum of the city beyond the windows only amplified the storm brewing inside him. Adam stared at the manila folder on his desk, its contents now a faint shadow of the truth he was uncovering. But one detail gnawed at him. The nurse, Beverly. If Bradley's story about her was true, there was more at stake than just Sarah's safety. There were others. He picked up his phone and dialed a number, his fingers tightening around the receiver as it rang. James, I need your help, Adam said, the moment his private investigator answered. It's about a woman named Beverly. She was involved in human trafficking, and I need everything you can find on her, where she's been, who she's worked with, everything. James didn't hesitate. Send me what you have. I'll get started immediately. Adam ended the call and leaned back in his chair, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on him. This wasn't just about exposing Beverly. It was about dismantling the network that had nearly taken Sarah and could still be out there preying on others. Over the next few days, Adam worked closely with James, sharing the scant details Bradley had provided. Beverly's trail wasn't straightforward to trace. She had operated in the shadows, her actions carefully concealed. However, James remained unwavering, and gradually the puzzle started to take shape. She didn't act alone, James said during one of their late-night calls. Beverly was part of a larger network. They targeted vulnerable children, orphans, kids from unstable homes. Sarah was one of many. Adam's grip on the phone tightened. Can you prove it? We're close, James replied. But it's going to take more time. These individuals adeptly conceal their activities. Do whatever it takes, Adam said, his voice firm. They need to be stopped. Weeks passed, each day filled with mounting evidence that painted a grim picture. James uncovered records of falsified hospital documents, suspicious transfers of children, and connections to offshore accounts. Beverly's name appeared again and again, a central figure in a web of exploitation. Finally, James delivered a breakthrough. "We have enough to go to the authorities," he told Adam. "This isn't just circumstantial. It's solid." Adam nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's move." Together, they compiled everything into a comprehensive report, which Adam personally handed over to law enforcement. The lead investigator, a woman named Detective Ortega, assured him the case would be pursued with urgency. "You've done the right thing, Mr. Hamilton," she said, her tone serious but reassuring. "We'll take it from here." That evening, Adam returned home with a sense of both accomplishment and exhaustion. He stood outside the bedroom door, hesitating for a moment before stepping inside. Marilyn was sitting by the window, the soft glow of a lamp casting a warm light over her face. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary. "Adam?" she asked softly. "What's going on?" He crossed the room and sat across from her, the folder in his hands feeling heavier than ever. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "It's about Sarah." Marilyn frowned slightly, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Sarah? The girl from the orphanage?" Adam nodded. "She's Andrew's daughter. Our niece." Marilyn's eyes widened, the shock evident on her face. "Andrew's... How? How did you find out?" "I had a DNA test done," Adam explained. "It's true, Marilyn. Sarah is his, and she's been through so much, more than I can even put into words. She was almost taken by a trafficking ring, and Bradley knew. He's been protecting her, in his own way, but she's still at the orphanage. She's alone, Marilyn." Marilyn's hands covered her mouth as she processed the revelation. Tears filled her eyes, and her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Adam, what do we do?" "We bring her home," Adam said firmly. "We give her the family she deserves. I've already started making arrangements, but I wanted you to know first. I can't do this without you." Marilyn reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. "You're right," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "We can't leave her there. She's family." Adam felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Together, they would fight for Sarah. Together, they would bring her home. The air was crisp as Adam stepped out of his car, the faint chatter of children echoing from the orphanage yard. His pulse quickened, but he steadied himself, his grip tightening on the small gift bag he carried. Today wasn't just a visit. It was the start of a new chapter for Sarah. Sister Louise met him at the door, her warm smile tempered with curiosity. "Mr. Hamilton, I didn't expect you today," she said, glancing at the bag in his hand. Adam nodded. "I've come to speak with Sarah. There's something she needs to know." Louise studied his face for a moment, sensing the gravity of his words. "She's in the library," she said softly. "I'll give you some privacy." She blinked, her expression a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and something else. Hope. "You're my family?" Adam nodded, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. "You've always been. And now, it's time for you to come home." The car ride to Adam's house was quiet, Sarah clutching the photo frame tightly in her lap. Adam glanced at her occasionally, letting her process the revelation in her own time. When they arrived, Marilyn was waiting by the front door, her hands clasped tightly together. Marilyn stepped forward as Sarah climbed out of the car, her movements cautious but warm. "Hi, Sarah," she said softly. "I'm Marilyn." Sarah glanced at Adam, seeking reassurance. He smiled and gave her a slight nod. "She's my wife," he said gently, and she's so excited to meet you." Marilyn knelt to Sarah's level, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We've been waiting for you?" Sarah's grip on the photo tightened, but after a moment, she took a hesitant step forward. Marilyn opened her arms, and Sarah slowly leaned into the embrace. Adam watched as Marilyn held her, whispering words he couldn't hear, but felt deeply. Later that evening, Adam brought Sarah into the study where Bradley was waiting. The older man stood as they entered, his imposing frame softened by the weariness in his eyes. "Sarah," Adam said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This is your grandfather." Bradley's stern expression wavered as he took in the small figure standing before him. For a brief moment, his usual composure gave way to something raw and unspoken. Sarah hesitated, clutching the photo frame to her chest. "Grandfather?" she asked, her voice barely audible above a whisper. Bradley nodded, his throat working as he struggled to speak. "Yes," he said finally, his voice rough but sincere. "And I'm very glad to finally meet you." He knelt slowly, his movements deliberate, and extended a hand toward her. Sarah stared at it for a long moment before placing her small hand in his. Bradley's fingers closed gently around hers, and for the first time in years, Adam saw something in his father's eyes that he thought had been lost: tenderness. As the evening wore on, Sarah began to explore her new home. She moved cautiously at first, her small footsteps echoing in the hallways, but by bedtime, her laughter had joined the sound of Marilyn's voice as they picked out a book to read together. Adam stood in the doorway, watching as Marilyn tucked Sarah into bed. For the first time in what felt like forever, their house felt whole. As he turned away, he caught Bradley standing at the end of the hall, his expression unreadable. "She's remarkable," Bradley said quietly. Adam nodded, his voice firm but soft. "She's family." Bradley's gaze lingered on the closed door, and he gave a slow nod. "Yes," he said, "she is." It had been a long time. Adam already felt a sense of peace settle over him. Sarah was home. And for Andrew, for Charlotte, for Sarah, this was the beginning of something happy. After Anna was gone, the morning sun filtered through the curtains of Adam's study as he sat at his desk, papers spread before him. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Elaine, leaned over the desk, pointing to key sections of the adoption documents. Her voice was measured and professional, but Adam's mind kept drifting to Sarah, who was upstairs playing with Marilyn. "This section," Elaine said, tapping the paper, "outlines the legal responsibilities you'll have as Sarah's adoptive father. It's straightforward, but you'll need to sign here and here." Adam picked up the pen, the weight of the moment settling over him. "How long will the process take?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with impatience. "A few weeks, assuming there are no complications," Elaine replied. "You've already cleared the initial checks, and given the circumstances, the court is likely to expedite the case." Adam nodded, signing the papers with deliberate care. Each stroke of the pen felt like a step closer to solidifying what his heart had already decided. Sarah was his family, and she belonged with them. Later that afternoon, Adam found Sarah in the garden with Marilyn. The little girl was crouched by a flower bed, her hands buried in the soil as she helped plant marigolds. Marilyn knelt beside her, guiding her small hands and chatting softly. It was a scene Adam hadn't realized he needed, a glimpse of the life they were building together. "Sarah," Adam called, walking over to them. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She looked up, her cheeks smudged with dirt but her eyes bright. "Okay," she said, brushing off her hands and standing. Adam led her to a nearby bench, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow over them. He crouched slightly, so their eyes were level. I wanted to tell you something important, he began, his tone gentle. Sarah tilted her head, curiosity flickering across her face. What is it? We're starting the process to make everything official, Adam said. I'm going to adopt you, Sarah. That means you'll be part of this family forever. Legally and in every way. For a moment, Sarah didn't respond. She stared at him, her small hands gripping the edge of the bench. Forever? She inquired, her voice barely rising above a whisper. Adam smiled softly. Forever. Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. Does that mean I can call you Dad? Adam's chest tightened, and he nodded. If you want to. Sarah threw her arms around his neck, holding him tightly. I do, she whispered. I want to. Adam closed his eyes, his arms wrapping around her small frame. I love you, Sarah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I promise you'll never be alone again. That evening, the three of them sat at the dinner table, the air lighter than it had been in years. Sarah chatted animatedly about her day, her voice filling the spaces that had once been silent. Marilyn watched her with a warmth that Adam hadn't seen in years, her grief slowly giving way to joy. Mom, Sarah said suddenly, turning to Marilyn, can I help with dinner tomorrow? Marilyn froze for a moment, her eyes widening at the word. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. Of course, sweetheart, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'd love that. Adam reached for Marilyn's hand under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with gratitude and love. For the first time in what felt like forever, their family felt whole. As the days passed, Sarah's laughter became a constant presence in the house. She explored every corner, her small footsteps echoing through the halls as she claimed the space as her own. Bradley visited often, his interactions with Sarah growing warmer with each visit. Despite his measured words, his actions, such as a gentle pat on her head and a rare smile when she shared a story about school, conveyed a lot. One evening, as Adam tucked Sarah into bed, she looked up at him with a serious expression. Do you think my dad, Andrew, would be happy? She asked. Adam's throat tightened and he brushed a strand of hair from her face. I know he would be, he said. He loved you very much, Sarah, and he'd be so proud of the brave, kind girl you've become. She smiled softly, her eyes drifting closed. Adam sat beside her for a moment longer, watching her breathing slow. He thought of Andrew and Charlotte, their lives cut short, but leaving behind a gift in Sarah. He thought of Anna, the hole her absence had left in their hearts, now beginning to mend. As he turned off the light and closed the door, Adam felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The legal process was just a formality now. In every way that mattered, Sarah was already home. The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Adam's study as he sat with Detective Ortega. A thick stack of files lay between them, evidence meticulously compiled against Beverly and her trafficking network. Ortega flipped through the documents, her expression steely and determined. This is airtight, she said, her voice firm. The connections, the financial records, the statements. It's enough to dismantle the entire operation. Adam nodded, his jaw set. Good. I want every single person involved held accountable. Detective Ortega glanced up at him. Mr. Hamilton, you've put in a significant amount of effort here. Without your persistence, we might never have gotten this far. It wasn't just me, Adam replied, his voice quieter. My father had a role in this too, and Sarah gave me the strength to see it through. A week later, the arrests began. The news broke with headlines plastered across every outlet. Trafficking ring exposed, key operatives apprehended. Beverly was among the first to be taken into custody, her crimes laid bare for the world to see. The ripple effect of the operation's dismantling led to the rescue of numerous victims, each story a harrowing reminder of what could have been Sarah's fate. When Adam saw the news flash on the screen in his living room, he felt a strange mix of relief and fury. The thought of what Beverly had done, what she had planned for Sarah, sent a chill through him. Marilyn, sitting beside him, placed a hand over his. "She's safe now," Marilyn said softly. "You made sure of that." Adam turned to her, his eyes shadowed. "It's not just about Sarah. It's about every child they hurt, every family they destroyed. This can't undo the damage, but it's a step toward justice." That evening, Bradley joined them for dinner. He had been uncharacteristically quiet since the arrests, his usual air of authority softened by something more introspective. After the meal, he and Adam retreated to the study, the weight of the past week still hanging between them. "You did well, Adam," Bradley said, breaking the silence. "You saw it through." Adam studied his father, searching for the distance that had so often defined their relationship. It wasn't there. "We both did," Adam said. "You safeguarded Sarah during critical moments. I couldn't have done this without what you started." Bradley nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Andrew would have been proud," he said, his voice quieter than Adam had ever heard it. Adam swallowed hard, the mention of Andrew stirring a deep ache in his chest. "I hope so." Later that night, Adam and Marilyn sat in the living room after Sarah had gone to bed. The room was quiet, the glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. Marilyn held a small photo album in her lap, one she had carefully put together over the years. She opened it, revealing pictures of Anna, her bright smile, her mischievous eyes, the light she had brought into their lives. "I miss her," Marilyn said, her voice barely audible. Adam reached over, gently turning a page to reveal a picture of Anna holding a stuffed rabbit, her laughter frozen in time. "I do too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day." Marilyn leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you think she would have liked Sarah?" Adam smiled softly, his gaze fixed on the photo. "She would have loved her, and she would have been the best big sister." For a while they sat in silence, the memories of Anna intertwining with the new hope Sarah had brought into their lives. The pain of their loss was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. In its place was a quiet strength, a reminder of the love they carried forward. As Adam closed the door to Sarah's room that night, he stood in the hallway for a moment, his thoughts drifting to Andrew, Charlotte, and Anna. He thought of the threads that connected them all, the loss, the love, the resilience. He thought of Sarah, her laughter now filling the home that had once felt so empty. Justice had been served, but more importantly, their family was healing. Adam walked back to the living room where Marilyn waited with a cup of tea and a knowing smile. Together, they sat by the fire, their hands intertwined, their hearts a little lighter. The soft hum of laughter filled the Hamilton household, a sound that had been absent for far too long. Sarah sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her face lit with joy as Marilyn helped her assemble a puzzle. Adam stood nearby, leaning against the doorway, watching the scene with a quiet smile. This was their life now, a house no longer weighed down by grief, but lifted by the love and laughter of a child who had brought them back together. A week later, the family gathered in the garden for a small, intimate ceremony. It wasn't formal or extravagant, just a moment to reflect and honor those who were no longer with them. Under the blooming wisteria, a bench had been placed with a plaque that read, "In loving memory of Andrew, Charlotte, and Anna. Forever in our hearts. Sarah stood between Adam and Marilyn, her small hand clutching Adam's tightly. She stared at the plaque, her expression solemn but curious. "This is for my dad and mum," she asked softly. Adam kneeled beside her, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Yes, Sarah. And for Anna too. She was your cousin, but I think she would have felt like a sister." Marilyn joined them, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We wanted a place where we could remember them," she said. "A place where we can come together as a family." Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on the names. "I think they'd like it," she whispered. Adam's heart ached, but it was a bittersweet kind of pain. "I think so too," he said, his voice soft. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the family retreated indoors, gathering around the dining table for dinner. Bradley joined them, his usual stern demeanor softened by the warmth of the occasion. He watched as Sarah animatedly recounted her day at school, her laughter filling the room. "Grandfather," Sarah said suddenly, turning to him, "did you like puzzles when you were a kid?" Bradley blinked, taken aback by the question. For a moment, a small smile tugged at his lips. "I did," he said, "though I think I was never as proficient at them as you seem to be." Sarah grinned, leaning closer. "Maybe I can teach you." Adam and Marilyn exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had all come. Bradley, once so distant and imposing, had become a fixture in Sarah's life, a grandfather in the truest sense. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared for bed, she pulled Adam aside. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "can I say something to them? To my dad and Mum and Anna?" Adam kneeled to her level, his chest tightening at her words. "Of course, sweetheart." Sarah stood by the window, looking out at the garden bathed in moonlight. She closed her eyes, her small hands clasped together. "Hi, Dad and Mum," she said softly. "I'm okay now. I have a family and they love me. I think you'd like them a lot. And Anna, I wish I could have met you. I think you'd be the best sister ever." Adam felt Marilyn's hand slip into his, her grip firm, as they listened to Sarah's quiet words. It was a moment of healing, of connection, a bridge between the past and the future. As the house grew quiet, Adam and Marilyn found themselves in the living room once more, their hands intertwined. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the room. "She's changed everything," Marilyn said, her voice filled with awe. "She's brought us back to life." Adam nodded, his gaze distant but peaceful. "Andrew and Charlotte gave us Sarah. And Anna. I think she sent her to us, too." Marilyn leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you think they know?" "I do," Adam said firmly, "and I think they're smiling." The story of the Hamilton family wasn't one of perfection. It was a story of loss, love, and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found. As Sarah settled into her new life, she brought with her a joy that touched every corner of their home, healing wounds they thought would never mend. The Hamiltons were far from perfect, but they were whole. And that, Adam thought as he held his family close, was more than enough. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.